Listen up, get ready, I'm not gonna take no more. There's a revolution, a revelation going on in my soul. Buckle up, get ready, we're not gonna sit back.
Ladies and gentlemen, brothers and sisters, theys and thems, all you citizens of the world, welcome to Live from the Heartland for the week of March 27th, and we are recording it 2 days earlier up here in the 49th Ward. And our engineer, Hal James, let us know that this is our 300th show via Zoom. You remember we started out at the Heartland Cafe. We ended up at the studio downtown. We had a pandemic, and we went to our home. And we've been doing it by Zoom now for almost 4 years, I think, if I do every week. 300 divided by 50. And we're really glad that you're here with us today. You know, in honor of 300 shows, I'm bringing on one of our original producers and co-host, the one and only Thom Clark. Good morning to you, Thom.
Good morning, Michael.
It's good to see you. You know, we've been around a long time, and the thing I miss the most about the old days in this case is when you and Katie Hogan and I would drive down to the Loyola studio, and we'd plan out the show, and we'd have a good time together, and then we'd celebrate a completion of the show on the way home. This is number 300, and I'd like you to share a couple of things that you remember about the show, why you think it's important that we still keep it going.
I think it's important to have local voices on any kind of platform. It used to be just radio, but now we're all over the internet and YouTube because they're important community voices that just don't make it very often into mainstream conversations. Although I think with the reducing radically of so-called legacy or mainstream media, these independent voices and outlets are even more important than ever to get real information and news that hasn't been massaged to death and rendered meaningless.
Yeah, it's a sharp contrast when I go from Al Jazeera on the TV to NBC or CBS.
Well, CBS is worthless now.
We're not watching it unless it's a certain game we got to do.
Yeah.
I want to thank all the people that I could remember off the top of my head who've helped make this show happen for, 20-something years now. You know, we started at the Heartland, went downtown. Now it's by Zoom. Along the way, Paul Wozniak recorded a lot of the shows. Paul Drous was a host. Meg Arbetter was a host. Laura Herman was a producer. Emilio Davis was an engineer. And today we have as producers Katie Hogan, Thom Clark, Lynn Orman, engineer Hal James, and then I do a little producing and hosting myself. So we are in need of donations for our spring fundraising drive. We're developing places where you can go punch in and make a donation. But in the interim, we're at livefromtheheartlandshow@gmail.com. And contact us if you would like to make a donation. We have a couple of wonderful rewards. Two of them include the book on Rising Up Angry, which I did, and my latest book on El Paso Juarez on the frontier, on the frontera. And we have these and other gifts to give away, so please get a hold of us. And it won't be long till we'll figure out how we can do it by you push the button and make the donation. Okay, with all that said, we're going to do about a 10-second musical break, and we're going to come on with our first guest, Craig Sautter. I don't know if I had that pronounced correctly, but he's a very prolific guy. He did a lot of poetry, a lot of books, a lot of political work, and we're glad to have him coming on. So we'll be right back with Live from the Heartland for the week of March 27th. Citizens of the world, welcome back to Live from the Heartland for March 27th. I'm Michael James. I'm here with my co-host this week, Thom Clark. And our first guest is someone who we have probably crossed a lot of paths with, but haven't met in person, but are sometimes co-host Ewan Haig. hooked us up with this fellow named Craig Sautter. Good, thanks, Craig. Craig teaches at DePaul, teaches about the Democratic Convention in '68. He's made TV and radio ads for candidates on all levels. He did Barack's first 6 electronic ads when he was running for Congress. So good day to you there, Craig.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
You know what I'd like to start off with is how you got into being a political hombre. I know you were involved with Students for Democratic Society down in Indiana in the day at Bloomington. And I think you were up in Madison. I don't know if those are the days of studies on the left and various William Appleman Williams. But give us a little bit about your history and what led you to this path.
Well, you're right. I went to Indiana University in Bloomington, and I, from the very beginning, almost the first month, I was involved in SDS demonstrations against the war. That was 1965. And, there weren't many people there. We demonstrated in front of the fountain where Dean Rusk was speaking. And there were probably about 40 of us at most. And, the fraternity people were screaming at us and throwing stuff at us. But by the end, by '68, everybody was there. After the convention particularly, well, the last SDS meeting I went to before the '68 convention, there were maybe 50 people there. The one that came 1 week after the convention, it was held in the largest hall in the university and a standing room only and people outside. It's a real transformation. So, it's civil rights. I've been interested in civil rights since I was a kid. My father used to, on WFMT, they used to broadcast King's speeches in churches when they were being bombed and things like that. So I was aware of what was going on, and I just wanted to get involved on the right side. You mentioned Madison. Here's my great story about the University of Wisconsin. I went up there to graduate school in philosophy, and the first week of classes, there was a demonstration called in the central plaza between the library and the student union and a couple other buildings. And that was called for 6:30. I got there about 6:20 and I looked around and there were big phalanxes of police all over the place, but hardly any students yet. So I went into the library for 10 minutes. I figured I'd go back out. At 6:30, exactly 6:30, the police kicked open the library door, fired tear gas into the library, and the semester was officially begun.
Well, let me ask you you talked about the small number of people demonstrating initially, and then it expanded to overflow crowds. What do you think? How would you compare that to today with the repression of free speech on campuses, probably initiated by the current president as well as university presidents? What's your thought about the evolution of protest in these days under Trump?
Well, I asked my students that. They said because of the technology, it's really migrated onto, protest is electronic. People don't really get together like they did. I don't really see the impact except on the Palestinian issue. I don't see any anti-war people out there. I don't see big demonstrations. I think that there are a lot more people involved in social action things, but they're scattered into different issues. They have different concerns, and I don't know. I'm wondering where the anti-war people are.
Well, this week we do have here in Chicago and across the country, we do have the No Kings demonstration.
Yeah. That's not articulated enough for me. I mean, that's okay. Trump's a king, but what about the war? What about poverty? What about, the immigration? I mean, I know they're all folded into that, but instead of articulating and trying to build a base around those issues, I went to a couple of those demonstrations. They were fun. They were amazing. Yeah,
a lot of folks.
A lot of people, yeah. And the police were not like the Chicago police of 1968. They weren't out there trying to beat us into. But it's a Republican who's in control now, not a Democrat.
The regular demonstrations, particularly since the outbreak of the war against Gaza in Chicago. And as different parts of that war have unfolded, there have been fair number of crowds with regular demonstrations closing down streets.
That's great.
In size, but we're talking about several hundred people at most of these. When they are strictly pro-Palestinian, tends to be a smaller group. If it's more anti-war, it's a larger group. So I think the anti-war movement is around, but there are larger concerns, if I can put it that way, with the repression that we're feeling domestically, including right here in our own neighborhood of Rogers Park. Really beginning.
I'm in Rogers Park too.
Before all the outbreaks in Minnesota, which were far more severe with a longer term effect, but I think I see the actions of the current regime as probing without really a particularly strategic approach other than their grand push to terrorize all of us, not just people who are brown who maybe came from another place. And I think more and more of the public are reacting to that, particularly as they wait in airport lines or are paying $1 more per gallon for gas. That may be the most radicalizing element of the current regime that we could have dreamed up. And who would have thought?
I'd like to see the anti-war movement build in Congress, because we're people. We don't really have a lot of power. We have expression of our distaste of what's going on.
Craig, I noticed that when I was looking up some information on you beyond what you sent me, which I appreciate, and it took me a while to read all the things that you've done, but I noticed that in the early 70s, toward the end of the explicit civil rights movement, you worked with the Urban League, and you went around the country working on voter registration. Could you share a little bit about what that was like and how important you think doing similar voter registration kind of drives might be right now with all this people putting a lot of eggs in the basket of 2026 and 2028?
Well, I was the field coordinator for the National Urban League's voter registration political education program under Vernon Jordan. My first lawyer was Ron Brown. Weldon Rougeau was my immediate boss. And it was a moment at which the civil rights movement was transitioning from, the sort of kind of protests that we think of to a voter rights movement, a voter power movement, trying to get a lot of Black elected officials. I think when we started, there were only something like 500 Black elected officials in the country, maybe less than that. And, when you talk about the Voter Rights Act, there's something like 30 or 40 people. But so we helped expand it. It was in the air that time. We did big voter registration projects in 36 cities. And, they did ultimately, the cities themselves, in part because of demographic changes and things, there are a lot of outspoken and effective Black elected officials. Today, here's the thing about voting. We just had an election, and in the primary election nationally and in Chicago, about 25% of registered voters turn out. That's pathetic. We talk about saving democracy. That's where we got to save democracy. People got to actually vote. And then then the ones who actually voted in that one, that's 25% of registered voters. It's something like 16% of all adults in the country. And then when you divide it into who won the election, they're getting like 8 or 9 or 10% of the adults in the country, or the adults in Illinois. So, there's a lot of work has to be done. And that's one reason Trump was able to win, for example, because he brought a lot of new voters into the process. If we know a lot of people who feel strongly on these issues, we got to get them registered. We got to get them out there, and we got to get them out there in the primaries when it really counts to get people who are progressive and feel like we feel on these issues. This was a pretty exciting.
I'd like to point out that Rogers Park, 49th Ward, had a 35% turnout. That's great. Yeah. And I want to mention that because mentioned earlier that it's one thing to have a one-day protest, but what's the strategy and organizing going on around it? Well, I think we've been working for diligently for a few decades to build up that kind of base in our own community. And part of that is not only good organizing, but building up trust and giving people a reason to care. We've had really good candidates to run, and the results are we have a pretty progressive rank of legislators, both at the city council level and the state legislature, that I think many of us are really proud of. And I want to tip a hat to
absolutely,
Hogan, who's been tireless over the years in not only voter registration, but accompanying it with strong organizing.
Well, Chicago's an island in the sea, and it is a great place. And since the election of Harold Washington, which people built up, which really came out of that Chicago thing in '68, it just kept building and building. And the Harold Washington election, turned Chicago into a progressive place. And we've been able to build on that, as you said.
So I had a question for you, Craig, from the Washington era. You and your wife wrote the report about Harold's education work.
Yeah, the final report of the Education Summit. It was Washington and Sawyer, because Washington died.
On the day that Harold died, I was working on a story about what happened to school reform. And over the course of the day, my morning sources, who were very critical of the mayor, called back to change their quote after news of his passing happened. But I remember the frustration of school reform advocates at the time and, trying to get LSCs off the ground and other elements like that. And now we're looking at a fully elected school board. Some 25, 30 years after those initial efforts were started by Harold.
Yeah, that's going to be fascinating.
How do you look at that arc from that original work that Harold tried to start through the rise of CTU being a powerful union to the current day where we're looking at what may be a mixed blessing in some people's mind of an elected school board and all the money that's going to get involved with that?
Yeah, we'll have to see how that works. Well, we start out with, what was his name? He was Secretary of Education under Reagan. Was it Bennett or something? He called Chicago schools the worst in the nation. And now Chicago has some of the best urban schools in the nation. So it's been a long 30, 40-year process building up some of these schools to help the kids out who live in these neighborhoods. And I think the local school councils have played an important role in that. When Mayor Daley II got in, he de-emphasized the LSCs, but still they were, on the ground helping to make real decisions at the schools and bring up the quality of the education in those schools. And as you mentioned, the CTU is a powerful force. They've made the mayor. They made the mayor, and the mayor is their ally. And education for all kids is the major issue for him. Up until Mayor Daley II, and maybe Washington, most mayors sort of ignored the school board. It was the dumping ground for patronage, and that was one of the reasons that we had such poor schools. But Daley took responsibility for it, and most mayors since then have tried to take responsibility for the quality of the schools. So that's to their credit, even if we don't particularly like somebody like Rahm or Daley or something. But at least they stepped in there and did something. It's been a long process, and now we'll see how it is. Right now, Mayor Johnson has backed the CTU and gotten them the big raises, but financially the system is totally bankrupt. So they're playing chicken with the state to see whether or not they'll step in there to fill the gap and make sure the teachers get the kind of raises they do and that the schools get the money that they need.
One of the things you did along the way was to produce commercials or ads for radio, TV, et cetera, for various candidates. And one of them you did was the early electronic ones for Barack Obama when he was running for Congress. And he ran against Bobby Russ. And then you say, fortunately, he lost. Otherwise, he might not have become president. Talk a little bit about making commercials and that particular one.
Well, for Barack, we made radio commercials. What happened? That's complex. Let's see. So he was running against Bobby Rush. He had some polls that said that people were really dissatisfied with the kind of district services Rush was providing. So, and he had a great resume in that he'd been, head of the law review at Harvard. Yeah, but people thought he was sort of an elitist. He's sort of a guy who just came in here looking for a power base. And he was behind before Bobby Rush's son was murdered, but that was sort of the end of the campaign the real campaign, whether or not he could win. So he lost. Michelle told him that he's never running for another office as long as she's around. And he had great campaign debts that eventually, I say this, that he was one of the first people that really paid off in full on campaign debts. A lot of people, when they lose, if you win, it's easy to raise some money. If you lose, it's really hard to get that money. So sometimes the people who did the work for you don't get anything. Sometimes they get 50%. But he did that. I think if he had won and been in Congress, be one of, just a large number of people. He would have been articulate. He would have maybe became like a Speaker of the House or something like that. But the fact that he was out there, he could jump into that Senate race, and that just propelled him. Maybe he would have done it anyway, but who knows?
Well, it was great when he came to the Heartland when he was running for the Senate. And I had not wanted to meet him. I was at a party where he was at in Hyde Park when he was running for Congress, and I was friends with Bobby Rush from the Panther days. And so I didn't want to meet Barack, but later we did, and Thom and I, we had him on the radio show. I'm going to switch gears here. And, you've done a lot of different things, but one of the things I noticed that you, for a number of years, worked as the poetry teacher for 36 schools in upstate New York. You write poetry. You have one poem being published.
I have 2 books out there of poetry.
Say it again?
I just have 2 books out there of poetry too. Yeah. Well, you want to talk about that? Yeah.
I want to know what was it like going around to 36 different schools teaching poetry?
It was fantastic. It was neat. My wife had moved upstate from New York City where we lived. We lived in Greenwich Village, and that's during my Urban League days. And so we had to find something new to do. And she got a job as an editor at an instructor magazine, which was way upstate. We thought it was a couple miles outside of New York City, but it was like 5 hours up there. So having created jobs for other people at the Urban League, I said, well, I got to create a job for myself. So I went to what was called the BOCES, which was sort of an oversight group for the different schools in the districts. And I gave them the idea, and they said, well, I don't know about this, but we'll try you out. So I would go to a school for a month or so and drive. They were all over. They were in south of Rochester, Livingston, Wyoming, and Steuben counties. And so I'd go there, and the first day people would be pretty skeptical, but I had some routines like showing a lot of slides of art. Famous art, and just having kids write lines and then trying to put those lines together, and all of a sudden they'd have a 5-line imagistic poem, and it amazed their teachers and amazed them. I remember going into one lunchroom, and I said, "Here's a good poem somebody wrote," and I read it. They said, "Who did that?" And I gave the name. They said, "There's no way he could have done that. He's the worst kid in the school." So somehow art and arts education and things like that really inspired some kids, and we did books, and we did it several years.
I'm going to ask you one more question while we got about 2 minutes left. In reading about what things you've done, I came across that you had poems from one of your books featured in a movie called Wild Blue Moon. Now, I have a daughter who was conceived on a blue moon, And I also like the notion of the blue moon. And can you tell us a little bit about what that film was about and how your poem showed up? I know it was at the '92 Chicago International Film Festival, and we got about 2 minutes.
Okay, well, a couple guys that I knew had my book on their coffee table, and the guys who were making this film, which is mostly staged in Mexico, were up here, and their main character was a poet, so they needed some poetry. So they said, "Oh, this is pretty cool," So they took my book, and the guy read my poetry, and I was in that movie that way. It was sort of an accidental cosmic connection of things.
How did you like the movie itself?
I liked it. Yeah, it was really neat. It was about sort of a hippie community living in a cave or something down in Mexico. But yeah, it was fun.
I got to squeeze in one more, Michael, as we sign off.
Do it quick.
What was it like to co-author a book with Ed Burke?
Oh, yeah. Inside the Wigwam, Chicago Presidential Conventions, 1860 to 1996. I was at a dinner for DePaul University Theater School, and I was invited because I'd gotten some kind of teaching award. And Ann Burke was the first graduate of the School for New Learning where I taught, and so Ed was at the table. She said, "Do you know any?" She said, "What are you doing?" I said, "Working on this convention book." And she said, "Oh, Ed knows some things about that." So I threw out a few things. What do you know any convention stories? And he rolled out a few, and so the band started up and people started dancing. I drank a bottle of champagne, a cup of champagne. I walked around and because I'm a Harold Washington person, So I walked around over to him. I said, "Started this new book on conventions. Are you interested in doing anything on it?" He said, "Well, I'd love to be a published author. Come around to my office." And we worked it out that way. It was a true collaboration. It was a pretty successful book in Chicago during 1996. Somebody sent a copy to Clinton, and somebody walked into Clinton's office to give it to him, and he was already reading it. So and they read it on the train, and it was in the books, the window of all the bookstores, etc.
Well, I got a story about him, but we're running out of time. So we'll save it for another time. Craig, thanks so much for coming on live from the Heartland. I hope we'll have you back. And everyone else, stay tuned here on the left end of your dial or however you're getting the show, be it YouTube, streaming, CAN TV. Our next guest is in the States briefly from Cuba. And we're going to take a short break, and we'll be right back with Pablo Menendez, leader of the band Mezcla, good friend, and we're going to hear a little bit about him in just a minute, where he's going to give us a report from Cuba, but not quite. Comrade brothers and sisters, welcome back to Live from the Heartland for the 27th of March. And I'm still Michael James. I'm here with Thom Clark. And our next guest is somebody I met in Cuba in 1997. I've always loved Cuba. As a young guy, I saw all the stuff about Castro in the hills. And lo and behold, it took a long time, but I went to Cuba in 91 for the Pan American Games. And then I went back in 97 for a music and journalist tour where we played baseball and had a bunch of music. And during the course of that visit, someone told me to check out this guy named Pablo Menendez. We did. He ended up coming to the Heartland Cafe on a number of occasions whenever there was a Democrat in power in D.C. And we had some great times together. And I've seen him and visited with his family out in Oakland. Unfortunately, he's here for the memorial service for his sister, Nina, who passed away. But because of that, we couldn't do a Zoom from Cuba, but we can do a Zoom from California. And that's where he is.
Why couldn't you do a Zoom from Cuba?
You told me we couldn't do a Zoom from Cuba.
Because the USA doesn't let Zoom do.
Thanks for pointing that out, brother.
Yeah. No, I mean, people think that there's a big problem in Cuba. And I came to the United States now to visit my homeland. Which a basic human right would be to come with my wife, who's Cuban, right? And she's been to the United States 6 times already when during the Obama period when they had the 5-year family visit thing. And so I worked about 2 years on getting a family reunification or some way so that she could come with me, when my mom passed, when my sister passed, or for this memorial. It's a basic human right, right? Well, the United States does not let her in, and they're not giving any visas. I mean, if she came here on a boat, on a raft, that would be different. But Zoom is not allowed in Cuba by the U.S. fascist government, right? So, I'm sitting in a virtual beach here, right? This is not really Cuba, but that's what Cuba you're missing because the U.S. doesn't let you go to Cuba as a tourist. You're not free to travel to Cuba. So I was very apprehensive to come here without my wife. I'm an old guy, and she's one of Cuba's leading geriatric doctors. And so, it's good to travel with, your own health care. Because in the United States, you don't have any free health care. And, I'm used to having free health care in Cuba, right? I just had my cataract operation in spite of all of the zero electricity genocidal war by the president of the United States that's waging war on the world. I'm trying to be very short and condensed here, but I was very apprehensive because this country has drive-in shootings, mass deportations. The airports are going crazy because they don't even have the, money to pay the TSA workers. This is a dangerous country to travel in. Now, if you come to Cuba, come and sit on the beach and have a margarita and have a mojito and have a beer and, have some really great music. Well, the United States doesn't let you come as a tourist, but you can get on a plane in Miami, or you can go through Mexico, and you can just say, I'm going in support of the Cuban people. There's, 12 different categories, and there's nothing, that nothing will happen. So the best thing that you can do right now is get on a plane and go to Cuba. That's just what happened right now. I'm very sad to be in the United States for this memorial, besides the fact that it's a memorial for a really great person, Nina Menendez. But my main concern was that people from all over the world, from Italy, from England, from Latin America, from the United States, are coming to Cuba in a big flotilla and convoy of humanitarian solidarity help, bringing everything from solar panels to food or, whatever it is, to oppose this genocidal strangle. We can't breathe because of, this guy that was not really elected in the United States. You don't have democracy in the United States because you only have, about a third of the people voted for they say that Elon Musk messed with the machines. And this guy spent 4 years trying to figure out, how do you rob an election? How do you steal an election? Just a little bit so they don't notice. But, 70 million people voted for this woman, and then 90 million people stayed home. That's 160 million people did not vote for this guy. And anyway, now he's rolling back everything that everybody in the people of the United States fought for during the 60s and 70s, 40s, 30s, all these years fighting to try to make the country better, to try to make the world better. And he's rolling that back. He has a whole. All of the members of the mafia are in the cabinet or whatever the positions of power, and actually people in the United States are afraid to go out because you might be shot by an ICE agent or something. So it's terrorism against the people. And I really think I'm living in the safest place possible, and I invite you all to come down to Cuba because we don't have electricity. Well. Chinese have invented a whole lot of big, backup things you can bring. And I have one. I keep the electricity on at home, lights and TV and refrigerator, and you think, well, not everybody in Cuba can buy one. But if I don't use the electricity when it's on because I have a solar panel, then I'm not using the electricity that has a heavy subsidy from the government and is sold at dirt cheap prices, not like Puerto Rico, where they've gone up like 17 times. You saw the whole Bad Bunny thing that started out with a protest about the blackouts in Puerto Rico. Blackouts in Puerto Rico, blackouts in Ecuador, which has like 80% hydropower, right? And they're buying electricity from Colombia, right? I mean, blackouts in Houston, blackouts in California, blackouts, no, you only hear about the ones in Cuba and about how much we're suffering. And because it is, the most powerful country in the world, the biggest military might, the United States, the president declared a national security emergency because of the threat from Cuba. How is it possible that 330 million people in the United States believe any of this shit? Can you say shit on your podcast thing? I don't want to.
Apparently we can.
So anyway, come to Cuba. You can hear some great music.
Al, we're going to play that song, Come to Cuba. He has that song, Come to Cuba. Make sure that's in the
Irving Berlin, another great immigrant. Irving Berlin and almost every great, there's a lot of great artists and great people. The United States cannot live without immigrants. That is the basic truth of this country. Everybody there is an immigrant. Anyway,
there'll be a lot more immigrants in a few years, I dare say.
Yeah.
Pablo, let me ask you.
Come to Cuba.
There's a lot of stuff going on all of a sudden the last couple of days. One of those, a number of boats are coming from Mexico, from Progreso, Mexico, bringing, solar panels, bringing food, bringing diapers, bringing medicine. I'm not sure about the oil part, but Mexico, it seems like they have sort of turned around. They were pressured for a while, and they didn't ship any oil.
Back in the days of pirates, right? The pirates would go and just shoot cannons at a ship and steal everything, whatever it had on it. Well, the United States stole 7 tankers. You know what a tanker of oil costs? And they sold the oil on an auction. Supposedly, the whole thing was about, it's all about rivalry with, China. But, the Chinese bought the oil on an auction, right? So, where are the stolen ships? Where is the money? Why did it go to Qatar, or whatever you say in English? What's going on? How can you have this whole armada that costs like $13 million on the coast of Venezuela per day? So this is like, in 6 months, how many billions of dollars of your tax money have been spent on blowing up little boats? I mean, huge ships with all these missiles, these little boats, and no trials. And then they're saying, yeah, but they were whatever. None of that has a death penalty. So it's murder if you blow up people in little boats, right? And that's what the United States is doing right now around the world. And we're in Cuba, like at the beach, drinking our mojitos and saying, "What the, and I'm going to have some Chinese backup."
Put that down, Hal. We're taking that out. That's for sure.
The whole thing in the world is very easy to don't get distracted by all of this wars and whatever they do to distract you, because the basic truth is capitalism does not like fascism. It only used it in the last century because there was the threat of huge revolutionary movements changing the world in Russia and China and Africa, decolonizing the world. Everybody wanted to be free, right? So they were very afraid, and thus Hitler. And so 28 million people fought against Hitler, and so the United States decided, wow, man, they're advancing on Berlin. We better jump in there at that last moment. But now there's no threat of a huge worldwide revolutionary movement, but you don't need that, because the only country led by a communist party that they have not been able to stomp out, to blockade, to wage war against, to wipe out, has gone past the United States. And the three most common words in the English language now is not "I love you," it's "made in China." So that's the whole thing is about that. China has no bases overseas. The United States has 750. They invade and bomb all over the world. China doesn't. You're pro-Chinese. I'm not pro nothing. I'm saying, look at the sea, look at the water, look at the sky, look at the ground. This is just facts of life, right? Not politics. I'm not talking about politics. I don't like to talk about politics. I like to talk about music. What have I been doing the last few months? I mean, I went to a blues festival in Rome. I was really happy to be there because they had 3 general strikes to support the flotilla going to take humanitarian aid to the Holocaust of our times, the genocide that's going on every day in Gaza, and the country that's rogue country that with American support and bombs is bombing every country in its neighborhood, like Beirut, like Lebanon, Syria and Yemen and Iran. Now they're attacking Iran. People in the United States don't remember that Dwight Eisenhower gave the Shah of Iran nuclear plants and enriched uranium in 1957, right? And Netanyahu, as part of his propaganda, every last 30 years, every speech says, in about 2 weeks, the Iranians are going to have atom bombs. Israel always does. And the only rogue nation in that whole neighborhood is the one that's bombing all of its neighbors and committing genocide against the people that occupy the land for millions, thousands of years in Gaza. Anyway, so what have I been doing besides going to Rome?
Hold on. We're gonna come to your music in a minute, Pablo. Tom's gonna ask one question, and then we'll go back to the.
I'm sorry.
Don't worry about it.
In Cuba, we make some really good coffee. No drugs. That's one of the things the United States doesn't like about Cuba. There's no freedom for the cartels, no freedom for drug trafficking, no casinos. The United States can't just go in there and do whatever they do in the rest of the countries. So they're very angry about freedom in Cuba.
Right on. Tom.
One of the main introductions for those of us who have not been able to travel to Cuba was the Buena Vista Social Club.
Yeah,
I remember my business partner went to Cuba on an artist thing. In fact, he went with Achio Bass to, learn something about poetry and other things like that. He was disappointed, as rich as the music of Buena Vista was, that it seemed like the local music had not advanced much. And he was because of the cutoff.
This guy is deaf, right?
Your stuff, and I'm going,
his hearing aids ran out of batteries, right?
Yes,
Cuba
I think
is
so.
one of the most respected countries in terms of music, and one of the most successful. I went to Cuba from Oakland, California, right, for 1 year to study music.
His particular slice, by the way, was jazz. He appreciates that there is a richness of musical taste and all that. And I was fascinated looking up for this interview to find this wonderful recording, Cuba's Way Too Cool, that you did with Bonnie Raitt and Woody Harrelson in 1999. How did that concert come together?
There was
from Havana.
A group of people that were doing this music bridges things, and they would go to areas of conflict in the world. I don't remember the ones before or after, but the one in Cuba in 1999 brought 40 artists from the United States, 40 artists from Cuba. They had two hats, took names out of the hat by random and put together teams to write music together for a week. And then at the end, we did a big concert that was called Music Bridges, or Bridge to Havana. And the CD and the DVD did come out. And my team, just by chance, was Bonnie Raitt. And it was amazing because she's one of my favorite guitar players and singers and ever. And it turns out that I was, like starstruck. And here she is sitting in my living room. We're going to write some music together with the actor Woody Harrelson and the Cuban guitarist Ray Guerra. And she says, yeah, well, for me, it's so fascinating and emotional to be in the house of the son of one of my idols and role models, Barbara Dane. And Barbara Dane is my mother, the first public person from the United States to defy the State Department ban on travel to Cuba in 1966. And she did a concert tour all over the island, sang blues and jazz and, folk music and all the stuff that she basically is one of the artists that defined a lot of those genres: classic blues, traditional jazz, folk music, whatever songs you might sing in a demonstration. All of this was kind of like defined by her in the late 50s, early 60s. And she's one of the great artists of all times. And I heard this from Amy Goodman on Democracy Now! Because for me, it's just my mom. I always just thought, she was there until she wasn't. But she was the first artist. And that's how when she was comparing the life of youth in the United States, we're doing everything possible to not be forced to go and die for U.S. oil and invading countries in Southeast Asia. And so in Cuba, young people were changing reality, changing the world for the better in reality, in Cuba. And there was one high school level art school in Havana at the time. Now there's one in every province, and Cuban music is one of the most successful projects in all genres, from classical to opera to jazz to folk music to rock and roll to rap or to reggaeton or whatever it is. And the fact is that the U.S., censors all of this stuff and you don't hear about it, but you can go to Cuba and hear it. So, we have festivals all the time. Last month we had one of the greatest jazz festivals in the world. Havana Jazz Festival in January. It's held in 4 cities during a week or 8 days. And people from all over the world, not only from the U.S., come. So we got jazz musicians from Asia, from Africa, from Latin America, from Europe, and from the United States. Some of the great musicians of all times have come down there and played with very cheap tickets for the Cuban people. And that's an amazing thing in a jazz festival because, I remember when videos first came out of a jazz festival at the Hollywood Bowl, where I used to live when I was a kid, right behind that. And I was looking at these people up in front with, their back to the stage eating shrimp cocktails or something like that. And the tickets were like, wow, about three months of regular salary in the United States. So anyway, in Cuba, this is all very, very cheap. At the service of the people, and there's amazing jazz happening. A lot right now in the private sector, which in the last 20, 30 years or something, that the private sector has been developing more and more. And basically, since the government does not have a lot of money, especially because the major industries are being choked by the United States, for example, tourism, and, trying to export anything or going to get any credit, the United States is, persecuting anybody who does any business with Cuba and trying to just stamp us out, whip us into submission. And with internet, they also are bombarding everybody and brainwashing you into thinking that, the government of Cuba is at fault. And, I just say, listen, you look on TV every day in Cuba and you see the president of Cuba doing all he can, he's fighting to make life better for Cuba. And then you see the president of the United States saying, my policies are working. They're really suffering now. I'm so happy. I really respect people's intelligence. And it's not their fault that they're brainwashed about the reality in Cuba. So I repeat, get on a plane, American Airlines from Miami, or you can go to Mexico. You can get on a plane and come to Cuba, come to the beach, come to the jazz festival or to whatever, the ballet festival, the opera festival, the whatever festival. Bring some solar panels or whatever you need because the United States might not let us turn on the lights. But we're not going to roll over and die, I'll tell you that much, because this guy says so, You can't say that. Okay.
All right. So the last time we had you on the show was, let me see if I can find it.
In October, when I was over in
October
Italy.
3rd in 2025, you were in Italy and your mom's film was showing, the film about your mom. Tell us about the film about your mom.
This is an amazing, amazing thing that now in this, present day and age, PBS is actually showing a 1 hour cut of the film 9 Lives of Barbara Dane. And it is an amazing film about one of the amazing artists of the United States that people have not heard about. So this is an amazing coup of progressive culture, of people's culture, of your culture, knowing about your history and your story, because basically it's somebody that, it's not some, I mean, I was talking to my grandson last October. October 2024, I saw this guy saying, in the United States, we might have to mobilize the National Guard and the armed forces against these lunatic, radical, extremist leftists. And he didn't understand why I was getting mad, because he said, politicians, don't pay no attention to them. They don't, they're nothing. That's part of the plan to make 90 million people stay home and not vote. Midterm elections coming up, folks. Anyway, I was saying, no, he throws things out there. And if you don't react in the moment, then he says, hey, maybe I can't get away with this, And so It's an amazing thing that the film about Barbara Dane, 9 Lives of Barbara Dane, is playing, and it should be like in every high school of the country. Somebody should look at it so they can tell the history, the real history of the people of the United States that have been struggling for a better world and for peace and for justice and against racism and for equality for all people, including immigrants. And, that's what the United States is really about. Make the United States a great country means getting rid of people like this would-be king.
Well, I'm really glad I got to meet your mom, and I do have photos you haven't seen of when you were playing in Oakland and we were in Berkeley, and I hung out a little bit with your mom. Also, I'd like to say we're real sorry about your sister Nina, who we got to know when you played at the Heartland Cafe. Mm. And why don't you tell us in the few minutes we have left, Pablo, before I go book my ticket to Cuba on American Airlines, how about telling us a little bit about your band Mezcla and how you're doing and what's going on with the band?
My band Mezcla, like most musicians in Cuba, is we're subsidized by the state, but the state doesn't have any money to pay us with, so you're getting not able to maintain as in years past. All these years, it was possible to live just from that. A lot of people now in my band are doing other jobs like teaching or music or doing a piano tuning or stuff like that, and most of them have some sort of a electric motorbike or electric car or we get around and we do stuff and we're working as usual. And I just put out my new CD, but it's a CD that I've been working on for some time. That is, these shiny things. Let me explain for young people. These things, it's in the past, people used to have these shiny things, round things that had music on them, right? So, it's called a CD, and you can actually play music. But I wanted people to be able to do things like see the film about my life. So I found out that you could do a QR code, and with the QR code, you can actually just point your phone at the picture there. You see the QR code to there.
You'll have to send that to our engineer Hal. He'll be able to put it up.
And you can see a film on YouTube about my life called So Near, So Far. And this is an homage to my sister Nina Menendez and to my mom. In loving memory, Barbara Dane and Nina Menendez. And this is the cover of her book, an amazing book called "This Bell Still Rings: My Life in Song and Resistance." So Barbara Dane, in both the book and the film are amazing, and the film about me too. So this is a CD that's not commercially available, but I'll send you one.
Sooner the better, brother.
But this is amazing. This has people from all different generations. There's like a 16-year-old jazz piano player from Cuba, of course. And then there's a 17-year-old jazz master from Oakland, California. That I'm just so happy that he showed up 3 years in a row for a jazz festival in Cuba. And his name is Io Brame. And so it's got a whole mixture. Oh, that's, by the way, the name of my band, Mezcla, means mixture, right? So it's got a mixture of all these things, but it's an homage to the blues, and it's all about my life in the blues, because basically there's a big booklet in here telling the story about how I grew up, with all these different blues legends, but when I didn't even know what that meant. I was just, I thought all moms did that stuff, having a jam session with these legends walking around the house.
Your mom was something else. And I remember your mom had these big boots on in the picture, and she did that song, Little Maggie. You understand, Little Maggie? And I loved her. Pablo, we love you, and we're going to come to Cuba. And I want to thank everybody who made this show possible. I want to thank Thom Clark for joining me today. I want to thank our producers, Lynn Orman, Katie Hogan, our engineer, Hal James. Okay, we'll be back with more Live from the Heartland next week. All power to the people. Keep doing good in the world. Over and out.
She can. Over the mountain.
Thank you for watching the Live from the Heartland show.
You got a dream
New episodes
awaiting.
air every Friday
I
beginning
can
at 9
see
a.m.
it
Central
in your
Time.
eye. It may
Episodes
not
air
come
each following Thursday on
easy,
Can
but
TV,
you know
9
you've got
p.m.
a friend.
Sweet Home Chicago.
I'll
on
be
Channel
by your
21,
side the
or
entire
streaming
ride.
everywhere
Just
else
let me
at
hear you say
cantv.org.
amen. Are you doing?
Audio episodes go live on WLUW
Are you
Saturday
doing
9
the
a.m.
best you
on the
can?
left end of your dial at 88.7 FM or streaming
Tell
everywhere
me, are you
worldwide
doing?
at WLUW.org.
Do it. Are you doing the best you
They're
can?
available on Apple and Spotify podcasts by looking up Live from the Heartland on either platform, and are also broadcast on Lumpen Radio Friday at 9 a.m. on 105.5 FM and streaming at
Too
lumpenradio.com.
done. Est-ce que
I'm
tu
Michael
donnes
James, and I'm glad to have
le
been your
meilleur
host.
de toi-même?
Until next time,
Si tu
remember, do good in the world because the world needs all the good that you do, that I do, that we do together. All
Le
power
meilleur
to
de
the people.
toi-même.
Over and out.
Quand tu l'aimes, are you doing the best you can? Tell me, are you doing